So does your edger blade look like this instead of that? It's probably time to replace it. Alright, I'm going to demonstrate how to change out the blade on an Ego powerhead edger. You can see that when this blade was new, it was about an inch longer, so I have definitely lost about a ½ inch on each end and nicely rounded it over. You can definitely tell the direction of rotation there. So you can replace this with an AEB0800 Ego official blade, which is basically a 2-inch by 8-inch piece of steel with a 1-inch hole in the center. Or you can buy the replacements that are generic that are basically the exact same measurements. The generics are just slightly thicker. The metal plate's just slightly thicker, but I don't anticipate that being an issue. Alright, I've already used my needle nose pliers to straighten this pin out. The cotter pin had been kind of wrapped around there, and now I'm going to try to pull this thing out. I'm not sure if I have that straight enough to me. Yeah, it's not too hard. So I got it part way at least. Okay, so there's the cotter pin out. Now you did keep your instruction booklet and the multi-function wrench that came with this powerhead tool, right? It also came with spare cotter pins, 2 of them. These don't seem to come with the blades, so it's good if you have them here. And there's this hex key, which they call a stabilizer. Now, if you didn't keep the multi-function tool, try a 9/16 socket and see if that'll fit for you, because this is real close to a 9/16 socket. Alright, so underneath the blade, there are notches on this thing that goes around, and if you kind of spin it around, you can just drop into one of those notches, and then there's another thing in here that you go in like that, and it stabilizes or locks the blade. So basically this little thing here, you follow it around until it goes into the notch that's right there. So if you push that thing into that notch, that keeps this guy from turning. Now once you have that in there to keep this from turning, you can put this guy in, and this is where it gets tricky, is to loosen it, you're turning it clockwise, which is opposite, so it's a left-handed thread, and that's to keep this blade from unscrewing itself as it spins around. But then you just unscrew the whole thing. And after you get it far enough, you can just do it by hand. So you get the left-handed nut, this outer flange which has some spines that connect into that. There's a washer type inner flange here. So this guy here is exactly the right size to fit the 1-inch hole. And this guy here also can come out, and they say inspect these and replace if they're worn. I mean, they're metal, so I don't think they're going to be warm, but there is some gunk down in here we're going to clean out before we put it back together. Alright, putting it back together is basically the opposite of removal. This guy goes down the splines, your blade goes on top, flange goes on top of that, and then the nut goes on top of this guy. And remember, if you're tightening it up, you're going like you're loosening a normal one, which is kind of opposite of what you'd expect, so it takes a little getting used to. Now once this gets tight enough to start hitting, it's just going to spin until you put that stabilizer in there again. So you basically have to find out where's that slot, spin it around until that slot is in the right spot. There's the slot down there, and then get the slot in place, and once that's there, then you'll be able to tighten this guy in place. And because tightening is the opposite of loosening, you're going to be doing what looks like loosening, but you're actually tightening this guy up. Now, to keep this thing from accidentally popping off and throwing this blade, we need to install one of these spare cotter pins. Now the spare cotter pins are nice and flat, and they're super easy to get into the hole. So in addition to being brand new and less likely to break because you haven't been bending them around, it's a lot easier to get in. Now if you do not have a new cotter pin, your local hardware store is your friend. You can just go there and buy one. And of course it's possible, if you don't have a cotter pin, if you took the old one out nice and neatly enough, you might be able to get it to go back in, but it's going to be tight, especially this little bit here. You need to get those two pieces really close to each other to get them in the hole so that it will go into that hole. And you're really not supposed to reuse a cotter pin, because when you bend them, every time you bend them, you make them more fragile. And since I've already bent this guy in and out, that bend is going to be more fragile, so it'd be more likely to snap off and break. The pin would come out. And then the only thing holding this on is how well that nut is tightened down. So if you have one or can procure one easily, it's always recommended to put a brand new cotter pin in, because it basically has been bent in this shape once at the factory. And then we bend these guys one time, so it still is pretty flexible and not going to shatter and break and fall off and so forth. Alright, new cotter pin. And that's how you replace this guy. That guy throws a lot more dirt than the rounded over one did.